Welcome to Millennium Counseling Center's podcast, where each week we go in depth into all things mental health, addiction recovery, and being our healthiest and happiest self. Enjoy. What if the strongest thing a man can do was say what he really thinks, feels, and needs? Welcome to the Say What Matters podcast with Oren and Rahsaan.
Thanks a lot, Oren, for taking this time today. I'm really excited about this conversation in a weird way. Feels like it's going to be torturous and therapeutic at the same time. So we've known each other over 20 years at this point.
Yep.
And we have never had this type of conversation before. We've gone deep about a lot of different things, but we've never talked about our dads.
I know.
And this idea of a father wound, even that term father wound, like what does that feel like for you when you hear it?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's going to be vulnerable and like expose pain. But at least for me, I've talked personally and professionally with a lot of people around the different things that shape me as a kid and as an adolescent and a young adult from the role of my dad. And so it's also comforting to know that this isn't the first time, that I'm talking about this, with somebody that I know.
Yeah, appreciate that. How does the relationship with your dad show up the most in just how you view the world?
So it's probably changed over different segments of life. Where it is today is not like an underdog, but that being in the middle of the pack, working hard, you get to really carve your own path. And I find that like his journey through kind of growing up in kind of a middle class family, going to kind of like a middle of the road college, a middle of the road law school, but then all of a sudden like popped in this very kind of exclusive law firm. And he had to figure out what that meant to now be amongst people who were achieving at a much different level and had been swimming in much different pools. That began this kind of like version of him of like, who am I in relationship to these people? And I feel like that for me was very similar along my journey of going to not being an amazing student, not getting into amazing college, not getting into amazing grad school, but then like emerging into a profession where like I knew I could make a really big difference and was very good at what I was going to do, but I was around people that seemed a lot smarter and seemed like they had been doing it a lot longer at a higher level than me, and that I had to figure that out.
Interesting. So how did your dad's experience show up in how he parented you, you know?
He wrote me a note card when I was 13 years old, and it said, "Make the effort." And so what I learned early on was what he valued was like not the achievement side of it, but like the working side of it, the effort side of it. And so if I were to look back unconsciously over the last 26 years in this profession that I've been in, like I could look at the effort along the way of just putting one foot in front of the other, and that was what was probably instilled back when I was 12 or 13 years old, was just continuing to put in the effort. But what was interesting is that I learned the almost a different side as him as a dad, not as a worker. So he worked at a international law firm and wasn't around. So making the efforts in the role of dad, that was confusing because I knew he was working hard professionally, but then what was showing up at home was someone who wasn't present. And then that began my journey of what is the role of dad in the home. And that was a very interesting journey for me to feel and talk about and learn about.
So what was that? What did that absence feel like for you? You know, growing up
Hmm.
and knowing that he's working for you, but then not being present.
Yeah, confusing for sure. Because when he was there, he loved to engage in sports and be present, but it just didn't feel like the balance was, but it was all I knew. Like I only knew that he worked hard and made himself really available to work, but then it felt like work was more important than family, as almost like a beginning of like what I would call in the industry like a core belief. And that kind of is probably where that original dad wound was that work was more important than family.
Mm. How did your dad communicate like love or presence to you?
Definitely very physical. We'd play sports together. He'd give me hugs, tell me story. I mean, it was like he would proximity. It wasn't a lot of teaching. It wasn't a lot of like, do this, don't do that. But it was just like trying to be present when he was around. And so that felt good. But then as much as something feels good with the absence of it, doesn't feel that way. Right. It's kind of like, and I just remember like wanting to feel more of that. And then what was interesting was I began to think about my professional like life and how my repair was going to be to not be as successful professionally as he was so that I didn't have to make that compromise.
Ooh, that's a deep one. You know, was that a conscious awareness or was that like showing up in patterns or how did that materialize
Patterns
for you?
showing up in patterns, right? Like being a B minus student, just I think was the beginning of it, right? Just not focusing in and concentrating so much on being a studious person. And then it started showing up in kind of like early job stuff where I was just like, yeah, I'm just going to kind of go along with things and go from here to there. But my priorities is work is never going to be one, two, or three. I mean, it's going to be on the top five, but it's just never going to put me in a situation where I would make those same kind of compromises and decisions. And kind of the long and the short of it is probably in my mid to late 20s, I started telling him about that I really struggled with his relationship with work. And I struggled with how that my identity as a worker and as a professional was compromised because of that. And a lot of other things started happening in my late 20s and early 30s where I started to see how that role for him was what he had learned from the previous generations in his family, and that it wasn't the intention of leaving me feeling that way, but it was just the role that he had learned. And that was really reparative and helped me actually probably be more open to excelling and growing in a professional world and not be held back by those kind of earlier core beliefs around work.
Yeah. What drove you to have that conversation with your dad in the first place around kind of how you were approaching work?
Yeah. I just felt like he was in a place to hear it. Like I think before it was like pain and I felt maybe less than. And then I felt like maybe more that I didn't feel the pain as much. And I didn't feel as less than. And so I felt like it was a time where no matter what his response would be, that I had kind of known my truth around it to be able to then tell him like how all of that had impacted me underneath the surface.
Okay, so if we pull on that thread a little bit,
Mhm, mhm.
what was the reparative work that you experienced where you had this wound and you felt strong enough that you were going to be able to share your truth with him in a way that it could be received or that you would be okay with however it was received?
Well, I mean, I think what happened is the types of recovery efforts that I was doing around my self-healing journey, and I didn't feel like when I was with him was stuck in that young place, you know? And I felt like I had kind of emerged into the role of my own adult, and then I was talking to him as an adult, but about my younger self. And I guess I was in a very fortunate place because later in life, my dad had done a good amount of his own therapy, and he looked at the
Mm.
different parts of his life and what shaped him, and so we had kind of the shared language. So it wasn't like he didn't know the types of things that I was talking about because he had kind of explored his versions of that in kind of his own path.
Oh, wow. Okay. So this is blowing me out a little bit because I actually haven't met too many people where their parents have done their own healing work.
Yeah.
It's typically been a one-way conversation where someone's done healing work and they're trying to reconcile or understand with a person who's done no work. And those conversations can be challenging.
And professionally, I hear that all the time as well. Absolutely.
So what was that experience like just in a very broad way of
Yeah.
being able to speak to someone about your hurt or your experience and them also having done some healing work and could respond in probably a different way as
Yeah.
if they hadn't. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, the stereotypical male conversations, right, are not about feelings or vulnerability or pain or weaknesses, and let alone between adult father and adult son. So I didn't really have, similar to as a kid, I didn't know anything different. I didn't know anything different here too. I was in a place, I felt like he was in a place. I tried it out and it was an acknowledgement, a validation of, and it started now a multi-decade conversation around how we are all evolving as humans and how we continue to grow and overcome the things from our past.
uh, so what advice would you give to a man who was man or woman, because these father wounds go both ways?
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who was navigating their own healing journey and desire to communicate to a father who has not done any of that healing journey?
I guess the advice that I would say is that even if there isn't any acknowledgement or validation from the parent, there is still so much relief and healing that can be done within oneself. Because I already started to feel better, less tied to old pain even before the conversation ever happened. That conversation just happened to mean that we were going to intertwine our conversations moving forward. But the advice I would give is that we don't need anyone else to be any different for us to evolve out of those painful places. And I guess another thing was is that I was in a younger, less developed or evolved headspace of like blame, or that like that was like an intentional choice, and that really evolved. I think the advice that I would give about around that is to notice where you are on the continuum of like judgment or criticism, and letting that evolve to being more inquisitive or curious about why that was for them and why they showed up in those ways, and not to justify it, but to kind of not be stuck within myself around in such a negative energy, because that prevented me from really seeing other things outside of what I wanted to see in that negative light.
Yeah, let's talk about that negative energy a little
Yeah.
bit
Yep.
because that's integral to these journeys,
Yep.
especially if you've had that experience where you've not received what you desired from your father. And anger is a very natural feeling. Sadness is a very natural feeling. Disappointment is a very natural feeling.
Yep.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience with those feelings relative to your dad and how you transitioned forward from those type of feelings?
Hmm. I think for me, it was more around not enough. I don't think that I didn't notice anger or sad as much as, is what I'm doing enough? And that tie that we probably all have to where what we do gets seen by our parental units, and then they're smiling or they're giving us a thumbs up or they're praising us, right? And then it makes us feel like that was enough. And I think that was a place where I was at for a while of like, if someone didn't acknowledge something that I had done or what I had believed I had contributed in a positive way, then it made me question it. And then over time, I began to realize that it's not anyone else's job to do that. And in fact, it feels a lot better if I do it for myself.
Uh,
If I put in the work or if I do something or try something out, that's not for anyone else other than my own reasons. So that's kind of like how that arc of,
mhm,
it was really looking for other people to see me, and then realizing that I needed to learn how to see myself.
mhm. What led to that realization that you needed to learn how to see yourself?
That's a really good one. I think I was tired of looking around for others and to make me feel okay, and then it being so sporadic, and then it being so tiresome of doing things or showing up in certain ways to get it, that I it was just that just needed to be something needed to come out of that that was different. Whether it was being a good boyfriend or picking up the slack somewhere, going out of my way to help someone else, whatever it was, like it was it's almost kind of like the definition of codependency, where if I made everybody else okay, then I would be okay.
Mhm. And if you think about that feeling, like where does that feeling exist inside of you? You know, where does that
Mhm.
sit in the body for you?
Yeah. Well, as I said it, I could kind of feel my heart race a little bit more, because where that ties both emotionally and intellectually for me is that I had some kind of control over whether or not my dad would be more present.
Mm,
If I would have just this, if I would have done that, whatever it is. And so like I can I can both emotionally and kind of like intellectually draw those correlations of how I learned to try to get more of what I wanted to make me feel
mhm. And what happens when you didn't get it?
good. Yeah, right? Try harder. Mhm. Here we go, Rod. You ready, man?
Hey, that's what we here
You
for,
ready?
man.
You ready?
Yep, I'm
Okay.
ready, man. I'm
Okay, great.
ready.
So if it doesn't work, then the other thing I learned from my dad, well, not just him because it was him and my mom, but what I learned was that if you make a partner happy, then it works. So the way that I made it work was I ended up in relationships to where I gave so much so that they would be happy and they wouldn't leave.
Mm.
And then when those relationships ended because they were like, "You're amazing boyfriend, you do everything, but there's just something missing," or "I'm not in love with you," or "I don't feel the same way for you as I think you do for," whatever it was, like, it was always so crushing because I was I was executing the program. You do everything. You do as much, you go over the top to make somebody feel good, happy, taken care of, special, and they stay. And it was like cognitive dissonance when it when that wasn't working. And so it would be just like it would short circuit. It would just like, and then I kind of decided that like I have to figure that out. And so if on a spectrum I was on one side giving too much, my solution for that was to go to the other side and start taking, which didn't work either. I don't know. That I would not give that as advice. And then what came out of the work was more in the middle, but more in the middle on the selfish side, where
Mm.
I have to be open and honest about how I feel. I have to let the other person have space to show up to show me that they care about me or they have feelings for me or they can take care of me or they can do something special for me. And I can't just do everything for the whole relationship and then think that that's going to be a recipe for success. And so spending a lot of time on one side and then getting the result that I did, and then spending a little bit of time all the way on the other side and getting the result that I did. And then literally 18, 12 to 18 months before I met our mutual friend who became my wife, all of this stuff started coming together. Thank you for joining us on Say What Matters podcast. To follow Oren or Rahsaan on social media or in other places, please see our information in the show notes.